Singapore should not exist. In 1965, it was expelled from Malaysia. No army, no natural resources, no oil, no farmland, not even its own water supply. If you were an economist at the time, you would have predicted collapse. Instead, Singapore became one of the richest countries on earth, safer than most Western cities, more stable than most democracies, more efficient than most corporations. So here's the real question. How does a country with nothing outperform countries with everything? And the answer is uncomfortable, because Singapore didn't grow through freedom. It grew through control, but not the kind you're thinking. When Singapore became independent, its leaders weren't celebrating. They were terrified. Unemployment was high. Ethnic tensions were explosive. Slums dominated the landscape. Crime was rising, and the island depended on Malaysia for water. Imagine trying to build a nation when your survival depends on another country turning a valve. Most governments would chase popularity. Singapore chased survival. And that decision created a blueprint most nations still don't understand. Here's where most people get it wrong. Singapore didn't become rich because it embraced capitalism. It became rich because it eliminated chaos. Large countries can survive in efficiency. Small countries cannot. So Singapore made a brutal calculation: stability over popularity, discipline over permissiveness, long-term strategy over short-term votes. Corruption? Crushed immediately. Public disorder? Zero tolerance. Government salaries? Raised intentionally to attract top talent and reduce corruption incentives. This wasn't ideology. It was engineering. And engineering removes weak points before they break. But here's the deeper layer. Singapore didn't try to be bigger. It tried to be smarter. Instead of natural resources, it invested in human capital. Education became a national weapon. Math, science, engineering. English was adopted strategically, not culturally, to attract global business. Think about that. Language as infrastructure. That's not accidental. That's design. And what they did next changed global trade forever. Singapore looked at the map and saw something everyone else ignored. Location. It sits at the Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest shipping routes on Earth. Nearly 40% of global trade passes through that corridor. Most countries would tax it. Singapore optimized it. Instead of exploiting geography, it enhanced it. Ports were modernized obsessively. Customs processes were streamlined. Corruption was eliminated from logistics. Infrastructure was built before demand exploded. While others reacted to growth, Singapore pre-built it. And when global trade accelerated in the 1980s and 1990s, Singapore was already waiting. That's not luck. That's anticipation. But here's the uncomfortable part. Singapore restricted certain freedoms. Strict laws, heavy fines, aggressive enforcement. Critics call it authoritarian. Supporters call it disciplined. But here's the strategic lens. Chaos destroys investment. Order attracts it. Foreign corporations don't invest where riots are predictable. They invest where rules are stable. Singapore understood something most democracies still struggle with. Predictability is more valuable than popularity. And then they made a move that secured their future for decades. Singapore didn't just build ports. It built trust, strong property rights, transparent regulation, fast contract enforcement, low corruption, competitive corporate tax rates. But unlike tax havens, Singapore required substance. You couldn't just park money. You had to build operations. So multinational corporations didn't just store capital there. They built headquarters. They built regional command centers. They built influence. Gradually, Singapore became Asia's financial nerve center. Not because it was the largest, but because it was the safest bet. And in global finance, safety scales faster than size. Here's the deeper strategic layer most people miss. Singapore runs on long-term planning cycles. Infrastructure plans span decades. Urban development is engineered. Public housing isn't random. Over 80% of citizens live in government-developed housing, but through ownership models, not welfare dependency. Asset building. That creates social stability. When citizens own property, they protect the system. When they protect the system, political stability increases. When stability increases, capital flows in. It's a loop, and loops compound. But the most powerful move Singapore made wasn't economic. It was psychological. Singapore engineered identity. Multi-ethnic population. Chinese, Malay, Indian communities. That mix could have fractured the country. Instead, the government enforced integration policies in housing. No ethnic ghettos. No isolated districts. Communities were blended deliberately. Why? Because division creates instability. And instability scares capital. Even military service was used strategically. Mandatory national service built discipline and shared identity. Small nation, surrounded by larger powers. Unity wasn't optional. It was survival. And then there's leadership. Lee Kuan Yew wasn't trying to win popularity contests. He was trying to build permanence. Policies were sometimes harsh, but they were consistent. And consistency builds reputation. Over time, Singapore became known for one thing: reliability. And reliability is rare. Rare things become valuable. But here's the paradox. The very system that made Singapore strong also limits it. Singapore's model works because it's small, highly controlled, highly monitored, highly engineered. Scaling that model to a country of 300 million people? Almost impossible. But here's the bigger question. Is Singapore free? Or is it optimized? Because optimization sometimes requires sacrifice. Speech laws are tighter. Media regulation is stricter. Political opposition is weaker than in Western democracies. And yet, quality of life is among the highest in the world. Crime is low. GDP per capita is massive. Infrastructure is world-class. So what matters more? Absolute freedom or strategic prosperity? That's the tension Singapore forces the world to confront. Now zoom out. In less than 60 years, Singapore went from fragile island to global financial titan. Without oil, without farmland, without size, it built wealth through geographic leverage, human capital engineering, zero tolerance for corruption, long-term infrastructure planning, social stability enforcement, strategic taxation, relentless efficiency. Singapore didn't grow naturally. It was constructed, deliberately, carefully, ruthlessly. And here's the final thought. Most countries ask, how do we grow faster? Singapore asked, how do we eliminate weakness? That's a different question, and different questions produce different futures. The real question is not whether Singapore is rich. The real question is, if your country had to start from zero tomorrow, would it survive the way Singapore did? Or would it collapse under its own chaos?